Okay, so we're here, page 505, right? 505. Okay. So last week, or maybe it was already 2 weeks ago, I shared how the rabbi tells the kid that me and you, we're gonna conquer the world. We're gonna conquer your world, your personal world, right? They tell the story of a great tzaddik that they told him that they heard a rumor that Moshiach came. So he went to the window, opened it up, and said, no, he didn't come yet. So later, people were trying to figure out, why did he have to open the window? And they realized that in his room, Mashiach was already there. In other words, he was already holding at a level that there was no obstacles to seeing Hashem. But he had to see if the rest of the world was like that as well. Why? So we started learning last chapter, chapter 36, that the purpose of the world is to make a dwelling place for God in this world. When will that materialize when Moshiach comes? Last week, well, I guess now it's already 3 weeks ago, we started learning how we do that. And we do that through performing mitzvahs, right? Performing mitzvahs, we change, we conquer, so to speak, we affect the physical world as well as ourselves. The problem is, well, I shouldn't say the problem, the difficulty remains that Mashiach affects the entire world, the entire universe. How can a limited amount of mitzvahs, 613 to be exact, performed by a very small minority of the human population, let alone of the universe, how can that bring about Mashiach? How can that bring about change to the entire world? So we're going to divide it into 4 gradual steps. We're trying to get from the micro redemption to the macro. So the first step is what we discussed up until now, and that is each individual action that we do in that moment, you are redeeming the physical objects you're performing the mitzvah with, as well as your body that is, or the part of your body that's active in the performance of the mitzvah. When you're studying Torah, your hands are not necessarily part of the mitzvah. Your feet are not necessarily part of the mitzvah. Your head is. When you're swaying, when you're studying Torah, maybe your body is more involved, but it's limited to whatever part is involved in that specific mitzvah. That's step number 1. We discussed that already last couple of weeks. But then there is a general redemption to the person, where the person, again, what does redemption mean? Redemption means unveiling, redeeming the godliness that is present in the world, that it shouldn't be concealed. So you might do a mitzvah today. Right now, you're sitting here and studying Torah. What happens when you leave? The redemption isn't necessarily present. So even if you spend a lot of time studying Torah, doing mitzvahs, there's still a lot more time. And perhaps even during that time, a lot more parts of your body that aren't redeemed. So from the micro of an individual action, we want to get to the next step, which is a general redemption for the entire person. Which apparently, based on the story I shared at the beginning, is possible for a person to reach. While not experiencing redemption for the entire world, they can experience a personal redemption. Then there is redemption to the nation. We, and we'll get a little more into this later, we, the Jewish people, are compared in Kabbalah to one person, but one entity.
One nation?
Yeah, but one nation, by definition, comprises of individuals. Our nation is one entity, one, but not just one. It's one individual. We all make up a single individual. It says, we'll learn about it too. It says that Yaakov had from Yaakov's neshama came 600,000 neshamas that left Egypt, and each one has 600,000 sparks. So we really all are included in one neshama, Yisrael. Yaakov was Yisrael, right? We are all one neshama. And we'll see how that affects our ability for redemption, because even if you manage to redeem yourself, if the other part of yourself, which is the person sitting next to you, is not redeemed, so even though in the micro you're redeemed, in the macro, you're just one part of the Jewish people, so you're not redeemed. All right? If the toenail isn't redeemed, the rest of the body isn't redeemed. And then once we achieve redemption for the entire nation, then we could think about how to achieve redemption for the entire world. That's the ultimate purpose. So that we'll talk about a little bit next week, probably. Today, and last couple of weeks, we mentioned the first part. So today we'll focus on the how do we get from doing individual mitzvahs to redeeming the entire person and then the entire nation. So let's see at the beginning here. Let's see how the Alter Rebbe introduces this to us. It's a for those who are following in a different Tanya, it's about 1.5 lines before 15 Adar 2. Thereby, and when you do mitzvahs and you use the food that you ate with the energy to do the mitzvah, etc., thereby all of klipat noga, which constitutes the vitality of this physical and corporeal world as a whole. Again, 99.9% of it, besides the things that are part of the 3 impure klippas. Then, when will this come about? So we said when the whole neshama. So this is a micro redemption when you redeem each individual object. But when will it affect the entire world? When the whole neshama, the divine soul in all of Israel, which is divided into 600,000 particular offshoots. The standard figure for the members of the Jewish nation, all individual souls being further subdivisions of these 600,000 general souls, as will be explained further. Okay, so once all of Israel is redeemed, all 600,000 particular offshoots will fulfill each individual soul, or will fulfill, in other words, once they'll fulfill everything, each individual soul thereof, the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. So once every Jew performs all 613 mitzvahs, then we'll all be redeemed. Okay, so before we get to how does this work, I mentioned yesterday, I mentioned a number of times my great uncle, Remendel Futterfass. So he said one of the people in his in the camp where he was in Russia, one of the inmates there was a diver, deep sea diver, and he was telling them about, I guess then it was always known, but then the government was involved in recovering sunken ships where you can find treasures. A lot of valuables can be found there. But you can't just send down a rope and lift a ship. Too big. So he said, what do? They dive down and they attach a whole bunch, as many smaller strings they can attach to different parts of the boat. And then you bring them all together, and with one pull, the whole ship comes up. If you put the biggest rope in the world at the bottom, pull it up, it'll rip. But if you put a whole bunch of small ropes, even if they don't all equal the big rope, but if you put a whole bunch of small ropes together, then you could lift it up suddenly. In other words, it might not be possible for you to do one thing to change the world, but a lot of small things can have that effect. So now, 613 mitzvahs doesn't encompass the entire world. How can we change the whole world with 613 mitzvahs? So our sages tell us that the number 613, by the way, you know how we know there are 613 mitzvahs? Huh? Yeah, but where does the Talmud know it from? By the way, there's different opinions as to what are included. So maybe there should be 700. Maybe we should take all the mitzvahs from all the different people, and maybe there's a total of 700. How do we get to? In other words, it seems like we know there are 613. The question is, what's included in the 613? But how do we know they're 613? Where does the Talmud know it from? Huh?
I don't know where the origin comes from.
So there are two places. The Talmud speaks about two places in the Torah, or at least two, that we know there are 613. One is a verse in Deuteronomy. It says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. The Torah that Moshe commanded us. So in other words, Moshe commanded us Torah. Now, Torah, he taught us. He's Moshe Rabbeinu. What does it mean he commanded us the Torah? That it says he commanded us Torah. What's the gematria of Torah? 611. Very good. So how do we get to 613? Because it says the first two commandments of the 10 commandments we heard from God himself. We heard God's voice say those commandments. So Moshe, and then the Jewish people said, no, stop, we can't handle this. And so Moshe then took over. So we heard two mitzvahs from Hashem, 611 from Moses. That's a total of 613. That's one place. Another place that's mentioned, this is a little more elusive, is it says by tzitzis. In Numbers, in the book of Numbers, it says that you should do the mitzvah of tzitzis, and then it says uri temoto. You will see the tzitzis uzchartem, and you'll remember what at kol mitzvot Hashem, all of the commandments. So if you look at tzitzis, I remember kosher. What's the connection? Well, it's wool. Okay, maybe. But look at tzitzis and you remember, I don't know, lulav. What's the connection?
The connection has a number of knots and a number of strings somehow add up to that.
So there are 5 knots and 8 strings. That's 13. And then the gematria of the word tzitzis. So tzaddik yud 90, 10, 90, 10, and 400. So it's 600, 613. So when you see the tzitzis, if you know that, then every time you see them, you remember all of the commandments. So this is how we know there are 613. Everyone agrees with us. There's no dissenting opinion as to how many mitzvahs there are. By the way, if you just for trivia, if you want to remember how many rabbinic mitzvahs there are many rabbinic rules, but mitzvahs, we make blessings on rabbinic mitzvahs. Like when we wash our hands, we make a blessing. That's a rabbinic mitzvah. And you light the Shabbos candles, you make a blessing. It's a rabbinic mitzvah. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah make a blessing. So there are 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, and together that's 620. The gematria is keter. Keter is a crown. That the Torah is a crown for the Jewish people. Okay. So these 600, again, there's no disagreement that there are 613. The question is what are included in the 613. Now, there is also no disagreement that the 613 are divided into 2, the positive and the negative. How many positive mitzvahs are there?
248. 248.
248, very good. Which leaves how many for the negative?
365.
365. So the Talmud says 248 correspond to 248 limbs of the body. Now the Mishnah counts how you get the 248 limbs in the body, but it doesn't say how we know which mitzvah corresponds to which limb. There are books that speak about which mitzvahs, but not all. We don't know all the mitzvahs, which limbs they correspond to, which, by the way, would be very important if you have a health issue. You know which mitzvah you need to concentrate on, which is why we just do all, or we try to do as many as possible. Maybe this will affect that part of the body. Okay, then there's 365 negative mitzvahs. So the Talmud says that corresponds to what would 365 days of the year, 365 days of the solar year. The Zohar says it corresponds to the 365 veins, literally like a vessel, blood vessels. Again, how the Zohar got to that number is unclear. I don't know. It could be general vessels, particular vessels. We're not sure. But the point is that the Torah says that there are 365 negative, 248 positive. Okay. So why do we do a positive mitzvah? We said, we basically explained up until now, we do a positive mitzvah to reveal godliness in the world. Yeah. In that particular object. Why do we have to abstain from a negative mitzvah? Or in other words, why is there a mitzvah not to eat pork? If pork doesn't reveal godliness, okay, so I wasted my time. But why am I not allowed to eat it?
Does it lower it? Because when we eat something, that's kosher to be elevated. Maybe by eating something non-kosher, maybe it subtracts from it.
Oh, well, wouldn't it be good to subtract from it? You minimize the impurity.
But maybe you're counteracting any of the positive that you already did.
Okay. Very good. So it actually it does both, or it does many things. Well, we live in a world. There are many things that we're told not to do. Right? Don't smoke. Don't breathe non-clean air. Don't eat this type of food or that type of food. Why? We recognize that even though the food is transient in us, so to speak, nevertheless, it actually becomes part of us. And therefore, if we eat something, or even if we breathe something that's harmful, it can actually hurt and affect our body, ourselves, right? We even know this to be true for spiritual things. Hang around not good influence, you'll be influenced. Read about inappropriate things, you'll become less sensitive and more inappropriate, right? These things are, this is how the world works, that you become influenced by the things we ingest, whether it's physical food or even the things we see, hear, smell, and observe. So anytime we encounter a negative, something that can have a negative influence in our body or on ourselves, we want to avoid it. Why? Two things. First of all, it will have a negative effect on us. Additionally, when you consume that negative thing, are you just diminishing negativity in the world, or are you feeding the negativity? We tend to think that if I take something away from you, then it diminishes it, right? Now you have less of it. Yeah, but now you're encouraged to make more of it. It's a supply and demand issue. The more supply, the more demand there is, the more you're going to supply. So every time we take, um, uh, every time we if we eat something that isn't kosher, so we're affecting negatively our body. We're also empowering the impure klipa to grow. We're giving it more energy, knowing that we want it. That's why there are 365 things the Torah said we're not allowed to do, because the Torah doesn't want us to be fed by klipa, because then we're getting negative energy, and then God can't be there at the same time. Early, you said it, I think, that it counteracts the mitzvah. You're doing a mitzvah to reveal God, and then you're coming a minute later and eating something that isn't kosher to conceal it. So you haven't accomplished anything. But even more, now you're also sort of increasing the klipa in the world. You're making more of it by giving it legitimacy, by giving it a space to express itself. This is why the 365 corresponds to the blood vessels. We learned in the beginning of Tanya that the animal soul resides in the blood. It gives the vitality of the body. So we want the animal soul's klipas noga. The animal soul could be elevated. But if we feed the animal soul impure klipa, then it lowers it. Yeah? So therefore, there are 365 negative commandments to protect the 365 blood vessels that are in the realm of the animal soul, to make sure that it doesn't have negative influence, and then it's capable of receiving positive influence. So it's like filtering out all the negative. The 365 negative commandments is to protect and to filter the influence that comes into the blood vessels of the 365 blood vessels. By the way, if you think about it, even the illnesses that we get in our body, where do they come from? Sometimes they come from outside the body. But what allows them to grow? The body. The body feeds it. If the body stops feeding the fungus or the bacteria or the cancer, what happens? It dies. The problem is it can't. The only way to kill it is by killing the body. So you have to figure out a way to kill its life force without killing the person. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to kill the source of the virus, the what's feeding the virus, without killing the person. The antibiotics can kill certain cells that feed it, and hopefully you get the right cells that you don't kill the person, even though the person becomes much more vulnerable now that they're missing some of that, right? Some of their. Anyhow, so the point is that we see how the way we can feed the negative is by engaging with it. 365 mitzvahs protect us from this.
Just aside from.
Yes.
Real quick, I just read this past week about the COVID virus.
Yeah.
The mRNA virus, that they found that people who had COVID and they had cancer, the COVID virus actually makes some of the T cells super immune, and they were actually
Really?
attacking the cancer cells. So it's this bad virus, the COVID, and they're changing it to have a positive implication. The people who have cancer, that when they inject it, that it turns these immune cells into super immune cells, and they're attacking only the cancer cells.
This is the virus or the vaccine?
The virus, not the vaccine.
Really?
Right.
And this is all types of cancer, certain types of cancer?
The cancer,
Really?
but certain ones they found at least that put them in remission. And since it's only been since 2020,
Right.
so it's still a short time, but it shows that maybe there's something there. Obviously needs more research and
Of course.
yeah,
So,
everything.
but practically that would mean if this pans out that they would recommend to someone who has cancer not to take the vaccine or to try to get the virus.
Correct.
Really?
Correct, right. Or they,
Oh.
or like what they have now is they've used the botulism toxin,
Yeah.
right? And they've used it for good use for what we
Right.
Botox.
Right.
Okay, so then a similar type of thing, they may develop something, the actual virus in minute quantity to stimulate these cells to similar to a vaccine.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
You say, these lights from the body, so they can hopefully at some point use it to help reduce rejection
Wow. It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah.
And by the way the world works, God did not tell everyone not to eat pork or shellfish.
Mhm.
God, it just because it's a three impure clippers for us, we're allergic to it, so to speak. We're not immune to it because we have an extra sensitivity because we're trying to reveal godliness. For someone who isn't Jewish, it's not a threat, right? Just like even the COVID virus, there were certain people that it would kill you like this, certain people that weren't really affected by it. Okay, so here the Torah tells us that for us, for the Jew, these things. Now, sometimes God might put a Jew in a situation where they're forced to eat non-kosher food. That means God's saying, in this moment, you're immune to it. It's not going to have the same effect as regular. We can't make that determination. Only God could. Okay. So at the top of 506, when will we all get there? When every single Jew, every single individual of the 600,000 will perform all 613. How do we do this? When they will refrain from transgressing the 365 prohibitions, to restrain the 365 blood vessels of the animal soul in the body, so that they do not draw nurture or receive vitality by means of such transgression from any one of the three completely unclean klipot, from which are derived the 365 biblical prohibitions and the rabbinical prohibitions, which are their offshoots. So the vitalizing soul could no longer ascend. If they would contaminate these blood vessels, then the vitalizing soul could no longer ascend to God, having been tainted by the impurity of the three impure klipot. For these klipot can never be elevated, but must be nullified and utterly destroyed, as is written, and I shall banish the unclean spirit from the earth. So again, remember, our mission here is, up until today, we spoke about focus on the individual mitzvah. But now we're looking to redeem the whole person. If you want to redeem the whole person, now you have to focus on all the mitzvahs. Focusing on all the mitzvahs means, first we said, refraining from the 365 negative commandments. Now we're going to get to the positive commandments, the 248 positive commandments. Before I get to this, an interesting story. I'm sure I shared this before, although I don't know if in the context of the Tanya class. It's a metaphor, for a parable. I think it was actually brought by one of the Hasidic masters. I don't remember exactly. That someone built a beautiful mansion on the beach. Another guy comes. He wants the mansion. So he knocks on the door. Can I buy the mansion from you? Absolutely not. Please, he offers him a crazy amount. No. Can I at least buy one floor of the mansion? No, absolutely not. Can I at least buy one room in the mansion? No, absolutely not. The last ditch effort, the guy says, listen, I come here every day to the beach. I'm just looking for a place that I could hang up my coat, hang up a bag, and enjoy the beach. Can I at least buy the rights to hang up one hook in the house and to hang up my stuff when I come to the beach? And he offered a large amount of money. And the guy's, oh, one hook? Yeah, fine. So he sold it to him. Half hour later, he comes knocking on rings the doorbell. The attendant opens the door, said that the owner let me come and hang up a hook. Okay, lets him in, shows him a little spot near the door. He hangs up his hook. 20 minutes later, rings the doorbell again. He has to pick up his stuff. 20 minutes later, rings the doorbell again. He wants to put back his stuff. Every 20, it's getting crazy. So finally the owner says, you know what? Why don't you just have there's a room on the side with an outdoor entrance? Buy that room. Fine. The next day he brings his whole family and they're sitting and partying and playing. It's getting too much. A few days later, he says, buy the whole floor. And so he brings all his friends. And before you know it, he sold them. He said, you know what? I just need some peace and quiet. Buy the mansion. I'll build myself another one. This metaphor was brought for the evil inclination. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination wants, like we said in chapter 9, wants to rule our body, right? The animal soul wants to, the godly soul wants to. The animal soul comes and says, I want to rule your body. And the Jew says, no, absolutely not. I'm a Jew. You can't rule my body. So he says, 90% of it. No, you're not being a ruler here. I'm a Jew. But when he asks just to buy the rights to one hook, one mitzvah, just one thing, then the Jew is a little less resistant because what do you own of me if you just own one thing? One thing, I won't keep Shabbos. I won't eat one thing. Everything else I'll do. But then what happens? Let's say a person that doesn't keep Shabbos, but every other mitzvah he does. Yeah. And then he wants to learn with someone on Shabbos Torah. The only way to get there is to drive. He's going to feel uncomfortable driving to someone, so he's going to stop learning. And then because the one mitzvah he doesn't keep. And then slowly the animals, the evil inclination spreads its wings until it conquers the whole person. So the same thing in the reverse. If we want to make sure, if we want the godly soul to conquer the whole person, it starts with one mitzvah at a time. But eventually the goal is that every mitzvah we have to focus on, because if you leave the evil inclination in, just give him one spot, it could end up contaminating the whole thing.
For that, the domino theory.
The domino effect, the snowball, the butterfly effect. There's so many different ways this materializes itself. All that type of yeah. Okay, so the negative mitzvahs protect us from outside negative influence. The positive mitzvahs, they reveal godliness within every limb of the body. Yeah. So let's continue here on 507. When furthermore, every individual soul will fulfill also the 248 positive commandments, thereby drawing down the blessed Ein Sof light below. Why is he doing that? To elevate to him and to bind and unite with him the entire vital soul, which is in the 248 limbs of the body, in perfect unity, because such is the effect of a mitzvah in uniting the vital animal soul with God, so that they become actually one with him, in accordance with his will, that there be an abode for him in the lower realms. And so great is this unity that they, the limbs of the body, with the vitality of the animal soul invested in them, become a chariot for God, as were the patriarchs whose every limb was in total submission to the divine will. Wherefore, they are designated as God's chariots, and so will every Jew become a chariot by performing the mitzvahs. You know what a chariot is? Merkava, but what's the analogy of a chariot? It has no will of its own. Very good. It has no will of its own. It does whatever the wagon drive, whatever the owner, the master tells it. It doesn't even tell it. Whatever it wants to do, the wagon, the chariot automatically does. By the way, from here, it sounds like the way to grow in Judaism is first to keep all the negative commandments, then to focus on the positive. Because if you're performing negative commandments while trying to perform positive commandments, it's not working. However, practically, that's not necessarily the case. Because as humans, we need something to live for. We need something positive that's motivating us. If a person's not going to put on tefillin or not going to study Torah until they make sure that they've rooted out every negative commandment, then they may never start. Right? So what happens? So does that mean every mitzvah you're doing while you're still performing a negative mitzvah, it's worthless? No. Why not? Okay, so that's one step. In other words, it brings you closer to the process where you can actually accomplish something with the mitzvah. But in essence, at the end of the day, the mitzvah itself didn't accomplish anything because the mitzvah is supposed to accomplish a revelation of God in this world, and the mitzvah didn't accomplish that, right? It maybe brought you closer to it, but the mitzvah you did when you were performing a negative mitzvah is different than the mitzvah you're going to do when you're going to stop doing all the negative mitzvahs, right? But it's a little difficult to say that because at the end of the day, that would mean that the mitzvah today is worth less than the mitzvah you'll do when you'll become perfectly clean from unclean klipas, right? That can't be. So the way Chassidus explains it is that a mitzvah lasts forever. The sin doesn't, because the sin you can do tshuva for, you can erase. Now, so if you perform many mitzvahs, even if they're outweighed by the sins, if one day or when one day you will do tshuva and you'll get rid of all the sins, all of those original mitzvahs will be seen for what they truly are, which is what you said, that they were all part of the process of revealing God. So in essence, they were revealing God, even if it wasn't in a revealed way. Their effect on the revelation happens now. But in retrospect, they were revealing actions, and therefore they're mitzvahs. So therefore, practically, when we try to encourage people to grow in Yiddishkeit, we focus on the positive, because that's what's going to get you more in. Once you do more positive mitzvahs, you won't want to do you won't want to do the negative mitzvahs. You won't have time to do the negative mitzvahs. You won't want to do it. So practically, that's the way to get there. But in a perfect world, if you had full control over yourself, the first thing you would do is want to clear out all the garbage, right? When do you move furniture into your home before the construction is finished? You don't, unless you have nowhere else to live. Because why don't you? Because if it's new furniture is in the home, it's still under construction, every day you're gonna have to be cleaning it. Every day you're gonna feel like it's useless. I clean it today and I have to clean it again tomorrow. Every day you're cleaning it again. It never gets clean. But if you have nowhere else to live, then you clean it every day. So as long as the person is still in the process, you do as many mitzvahs as possible. Sure, they'll be sort of dirtied up by the sins, but that dirt can later be cleansed. That dirt can later be taken away. So now that we've redeemed ourselves in entirety, how do we redeem ourselves entirely? By performing all 613 mitzvahs, right? When a person performs all 613 mitzvahs, they become entirely redeemed. So now we get to the next step, which is redeeming the entire people, the entire nation of it, the entire people of Israel. And like we mentioned, Kabbalah says that the entire Jewish people, which is comprised of 600,000 general souls, are all really one entity, one individual. Therefore, it's not just enough for me to accomplish my 613, every person has to accomplish their 613. So there are two ways to go about this. One is through the mystical concept of Gilgul. You know what Gilgul is? Reincarnation. I guess similar to reincarnation. Huh? Right.
I'd come and work Gal,
Yeah, cycle. Yeah, exactly. So if I'm a man, there are many mitzvahs I can't do. Because there are mitzvahs that are given specifically to women. If I'm a woman, there are many mitzvahs I can't do. If I'm a Kohen, there are mitzvahs that I can't do. And if I'm an Israelite, there are mitzvahs I can't do. If I'm a regular person, there are mitzvahs I can't do. If I'm a high priest, if I'm a king, there are mitzvahs I can't do. If I live in Israel, there are mitzvahs I can't do. And if I don't live in Israel, there are mitzvahs I can't do. So it's impossible for any one individual to perform all 613. Literally impossible. For that, we have one unit. But it's also impossible for any given person to perform all 613. It is possible, though, if we include all the times our soul was in this world. Because our soul could have been here as female, as male. It could have been here as Kohen, or as Israelite, or as a Levi. It could have been here as a king, or as a slave, as a servant. It could have been here as anything. But we don't know. That's why we have to perform every mitzvah. We don't know what our soul might be missing. As soon as there's a soul that performs all 613 mitzvahs perfectly, that soul doesn't come back down. That soul's finished. The Talmud says Mashiach will come. God is waiting for the chest of souls to be emptied. In other words, God's waiting for every soul to finish their mission. Once a soul finishes its mission, it doesn't come back down. So any soul that's here, that's alive, by definition means your soul was here before, and there's still something you didn't finish. You want your soul not to have to come back down again? Do every mitzvah you possibly can in the most perfect way you possibly can, which means you'll have to do them again and again and again, because the more you grow, the more perfect you can do them. And you hope and pray that God leads you to the right place and the right time to do the mitzvah that your soul is waiting to do. But then there's another part. The other part is that we have an entire people to rely on. We're all part of the same unit, of the same individual. So just because I can't perform a mitzvah because I'm a man, but if I encourage a woman to perform a mitzvah, then it counts for me too, because we're right hand, left hand, or right finger, left finger. We're all part of the same entity. What happens with all the sins people? If we're all connected with mitzvahs, what about all the sins that connect us? Hey, but again, sins we can get rid of by doing tshuva, Yom Kippur. That's something we can get rid of. The mitzvah will never get rid of, and therefore, the more mitzvahs we do, the more credit we have, so that when we do clean up our act, all of those mitzvahs come out shining. This affects the general Mashiach, the Mashiach that will come for the Jewish people. But then we said there's another step, which we'll get into a little more detail next week. But the next step is that once the Jewish people are redeemed, Mashiach is that we're going to have a perfect life. We can have a perfect life if everyone else around us is still trying to kill us. So the whole world has to be redeemed, and not just the human world, the animal world too. If the wolf will attack me, then it's not a perfect world. So the wolf has to lie with the lamb. And then if I have to go out and work so hard on planting things and they don't even grow good food at the end, it's also not a perfect world. So the vegetative world has to become perfectly on the way it was in the Garden of Eden. And even the inanimate world, which now today, especially with technology, so much good, but also so much negativity. Atomic energy can be used for the most positive things in the world, can also be used for the most terrible things in the world. So as long as that's not eliminated, if the negative there isn't gone, still not a perfect world. So in order for the Jewish people to experience redemption, the individual has to experience redemption. But in order for the Jewish people to experience redemption, the whole world has to experience redemption. But now that we learned that you have to deal in the micro in order to get to the macro. And when you use the food that you eat to do a mitzvah, that helps elevate the work that you work to get the money that you got to buy the food and to spend the time and to make the food. All of that is included. So when we think about that, we think about the fact that God wants us to create a dwelling place for home in this world. So then what happens at the end when every Jew performs every mitzvah, every one of the 613 mitzvah? This brings about a general elevation in the material of the world. That the material of the world is now seen more acclimated towards revealing godliness. The more people see, the more the world sees Jews at their best, the more the world believes this can be accomplished. it's amazing. Although it's unfortunate that many people turn a blind eye to it, Israel's in the news for all the wrong reasons. What about the times when Israel's the first to send aid to countries in need or in distress, and they're the ones that are able to pull off the technological things to save people stuck in some hole thousands of feet in the ground, or to when we are at our best and we show the world what the world is capable of, if the world is capable of being a home for God, this in turn changes and can turn over the whole world. Okay, let's continue here. Yeah, so far. Yeah.
Oh, so I was just gonna ask, what you're talking about?
No, well, I wanna still. No, I don't want to stop. I want to still continue a little bit. But you had a question.
Well, just to say, there's a book out called Start of Nation, which
Okay.
all of the things that modernization things that were started by Jews. And, you know, you look back at the Nobel Prizes, you know, we're such a small minority, yet they compromise, they comprise a lot of the Nobel Prize winners, and, you know, and all these things. And
When you see the list that people put out when people want to boycott Israel, you see all the lists of all the things they'd have to boycott if they truly wanted to boycott everything that Israel invented or produced.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. There's no other country that per capita has produced such universal goods, such universal benefits. And it's lost unfortunately, it's lost in the headlines. But it's the more that becomes revealed, the more the world sees it, the more the world sees what we're capable of. Well, it knows what the world sees what they're capable of, what they can accomplish. The Jews haven't had a peaceful moment in 3,000 years. 2,000 years, they haven't had a peaceful moment. And yet we still manage to produce over 120,000 that we have today, or from 2,000 years, over 120,000 books that were written. Again, that's that we have. Probably a vast majority of historical Jewish writings aren't even around, aren't preserved. And that was all done while running from this pogrom and from this from this dictator or Hitler or any other person or people that wanted to kill us. So if we're capable of doing that, can you imagine what the rest of the world is capable of doing if they focused on producing something positive, on having an effect and making a change, and not thinking, what am I capable of? Okay. So 508, once the totality of the vital soul of the community of Israel. So again, we're not just of the individual as an individual, but of every individual, because we all comprise the community that will become a holy chariot for God. Then also the general vitality of this world, which now consists of klipas noga, will also emerge from its impurity and sickness. The term impurity refers to the evil of the klipa, and sickness refers to the element of good that klipas noga contains, which is nevertheless the good of klipa, but not holiness. And will ascend to holiness. In other words, will redeem the sickness and make it healthy. We'll redeem its essence. And we're going to turn it to become a chariot for God upon the revelation of his glory in the world to come, where then all flesh will behold godliness together, and he will appear over them with the majestic beauty of his power, and the glory of God will fill the whole world. And Israel will see eye to eye. In other words, the human eye will see the truth of godliness, just as the supernal eye sees it. In other words, just as they saw it at the beginning of the Torah, of which it is written, you showed yourself. In other words, God showed himself so that it will be known that God is the Lord, so that we'll be able to see that God is the Lord. The four-letter divine name, Elohim, the four-letter divine name is Elohim. Ki Hashem hu Elohim, that Hashem is Elohim. In other words, despite the concealment of the four-letter divine name, which denotes God's limitless power, by the name Elohim, which signifies God's self-limitation. So usually these two names, Havaya represents revelation. Elohim, which, like we said previously, is the gematria of nature. Elohim represents concealment. So it looks like it says in the verse, Kishemesh umagein Havaya Elokim. The sun and its shield is like Havaya and Elokim. In other words, Elokim distorts Havaya. When Mashiach will come, and what happened at the beginning of the Torah is that we realized that really Havaya is Elokim. It's all the same. It's all God. When God conceals himself, he's not using something else to conceal him. He's concealing himself. So the concealment is really part of him. The former that still pervades all, so it is the former that still pervades all existence. There is nothing else besides him. And through this ascent of Klipas Noga to holiness, the three unclean klipot will be utterly annihilated and nullified. For the nurture and vitality which they now receive from holiness comes to them only by the way of Klipas Noga, the intermediary between them. So in other words, today, how does the three unclean klipos receive sustenance and vitality? How do they live? What do they thrive off of? Klipas Noga, right? When we make the wrong choice, we feed the three unclean klipos. But if klipas noga is elevated to kiddush, to holiness, to godliness, there's no klipas noga anymore. So what happens to the three unclean klipos? They walk away into the abyss. There's nothing left for them. They can't feed on anything. They starve to death. It won't take 3 days to starve to death. They'll starve right away because there's no oxygen left for them. There's nothing left. Okay, let's just read the next two paragraphs, and then we'll follows therefore that the purpose of the Messianic era and of the resurrection, namely the revelation of his glory and divinity, and the banishment of the spirit of impurity from the earth, how do we bring that about, is entirely dependent on our drawing down his godliness and the blessed Ein Sof light upon all the 248 limbs of the vital soul of all Israel. For by way of the vital soul, all the world will be suffused with godliness. And this is achieved by the vital soul's performance of all 248 positive mitzvahs. But we also have to, and this purpose is also dependent on our banishing the spirit of impurity. In other words, the three impure klipas from the vital soul of all Israel. For by being banished from the vital soul, the spirit of impurity is banished from the entire world. How do we do that? How do we banish the impure klipas? This is accomplished by the vital soul's observance of all 365 prohibitive mitzvahs, thus preventing its 365 blood vessels from drawing nurture from the spirit of impurity. We're suffocating it, basically. You have to enhance and grow and feed the godly soul, that it should reign supreme over the animal soul, and you have to suffocate the three unclean klipas by not allowing the animal soul to engage in it, to give them the oxygen they need to thrive. What happens in a culture where, use an example, it's an example, it's not the worst example, it's not the best, in other words, it's not the worst thing, it's not the best thing. Profanity. How do you stop profanity?
You have to make a conscious effort to
The person who's being profane, it would be very difficult for them to stop it. But we can stop it. How do we stop it? When someone uses not nice language, don't engage, don't acknowledge it. You suffocate, you're taking the oxygen. Why does someone use a profane language? They're trying to express and to influence. What happens if you totally ignore it, lose the oxygen? Then after a while, they're not going to feel the need to say it. They'll feel almost weird saying it. The same thing is with every other behavior. It's not. I picked that example because it's like the most prevalent. People don't see it as so terrible, and I think it can lead to very terrible things. Especially when you start seeing kids, it's horrible. You hear the way people speak. But again, this is the way we do it. We have to grow. We have to vitalize the godly. So we have to suffocate not the animal soul. When we use the animal soul for godliness, we suffocate the impure klipas, and then it just dies off. And then redemption comes. Redemption is an automatic result of that, because the world now becomes a godly place. Sure, we believe it'll be brought about through Mashiach. There's a process, but that's practically how it happens, how we bring it about. So we started at the beginning. How do we get from the micro to the macro? How do we get from my individual mitzvah to changing the world? Well, It's a whole bunch of individual mitzvahs that ultimately changes you and ultimately can change the whole world. And you next week. You won't be here next week. Okay. So we'll have to see. We'll have to make sure. Rogers also, he's gone now.
Yeah.
I mean, he's leaving, but they're leaving Tuesday, I think, Tuesday or
Yeah, Tuesday, I think it takes like.
not Monday, because he's coming. I think Susan's coming to the bat mitzvah, which is Monday.
Yeah.
So